I had a whole 2-page prologue written for this video a month prior to this movie's release, going over all the negative press it had been receiving ever since the Cannes Film Festival, and how I wasn't going to let any of it dissuade me from going into Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny with an open mind, hoping that it would send one of the most legendary characters in cinematic history out on a much higher note than the complete and utter train wreck that was Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But now that I've actually seen the film, I've thrown that entire prologue in the garbage. You wanna know why? Because I don't have the energy or state of mind to create a suspenseful and carefully paced build-up to whether or not I enjoyed this movie right now. I'll just come right out and say it. I hated almost every single frame of this film, and I am pissed beyond belief at the complete and unadulterated levels of bullshit I was forced to endure for 2.5 hours. And it's not because I went in expecting or hoping for it to be bad. If you are a member of my Discord server, you know that I have been campaigning for this to be good, possibly more than anybody else. Even when faced with a director that wasn't Steven Spielberg, an ancient Harrison Ford, a previous entry that wound up being one of the worst movies I'd ever seen, robbing The Last Crusade of its impossibly perfect conclusive satisfaction, a game of hot potato with how many times this thing had changed creative teams, and time travel rumors. Even when it seemed like I was the only person in the entire world who was even remotely optimistic about this film being anything other than complete trash, I walked into that theater on Thursday night with my head held high, skeptical, but still excited to see one last adventure with Indiana Jones before they close the curtain on his story forever and give him the send-off he deserved after all this time. I wasn't even looking for a masterpiece. I knew that expecting it to reach the unparalleled heights of Spielberg's trilogy was a foolish endeavor. I would have been content if it was just decent, even like a 5 or 6 out of 10, as long as it stuck the landing and didn't destroy Indy's character. I figured surely the expectation of being worse than the original trilogy but still better than Crystal Skull, and not assassinating every fundamental aspect of the main character of your franchise, wasn't too much to ask of Dial of Destiny. Well, guess what? After I saw this movie, I wanted to scream. I was sat there in my seat, staring at the screen in complete and utter disbelief at what I had just witnessed, and I had a morbidly sickening feeling in my stomach that I had not experienced in a very, very long time. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is so much worse than I ever could have imagined. However bad you think it is, whatever picture of this movie you have in your head, I promise you it's worse than that. I was shocked by just how catastrophically terrible every single scene of this thing was. And it wasn't even a slow burn building to a horrific ending. From the opening minutes, I was already extremely put off, and it just kept getting worse and worse the longer this sludge dragged on for. I'm just gonna warn you now that A, there will be no aversion to spoilers in this video. I'm going to spoil absolutely everything from Dial of Destiny as well as previous Indiana Jones movies. If you don't want that, then go get yourself caught up on the story and come back when you're ready. B, if you're expecting this video to be a super well structured and meticulously crafted level-headed analysis in line with what I'm hoping to create with my upcoming Halo Infinite and Owl House videos, then you may as well just click off this video now. There will be no structure here, so I'm sorry in advance if you find this somewhat hard to follow, but this film is also hard to follow because of how cosmically stupid it is. This is not a measured or clinical critique. This is going to be a heated stream of consciousness rant, and I'm not going to pretend that it's anything else. The credits rolled on this film, and I was pissed as hell. So now I need to rant about it because I legitimately have not felt this level of intense hatred towards a movie in years. But if that's cool with you, then fasten your seatbelts. There might be a bit of turbulence. So we open in the 1940s as the Nazis are loading artifacts onto a train and Indy gets captured trying to retrieve some of them, ultimately leading to a super intense motorcycle chase and train fight. This is a cold open that lasts for nearly 20 minutes, and something I've seen from every single review of this movie is that, regardless of whether they enjoyed it as a whole or not, everyone unanimously agrees that these opening 20 minutes are fantastic and exactly what they were hoping for. Literally, what are all of you talking about? I mean, I get it. It's 20 minutes of almost non-stop action featuring a young Harrison Ford kicking ass like he did back in the good old days. And hey, the de-aging on his face looks great. They sadly can't do anything about the voice of an 80-year-old coming out of the body of a 40-year-old. Well, I mean, they can, but the alternative isn't exactly something that I want to advocate for. I would still rather Harrison Ford give the vocal performance as young Indy than I would they try to digitally recreate his younger voice with AI for as jarring as it is to hear. But the face itself is is quite impressive, and easily the best utilization of this technology I've seen so far. And yes, this opening is undoubtedly the best part of the movie, but I don't know how much glowing praise it is to be the best part of an absolutely horrible film. Especially not when said part is the very beginning and there's still 2 hours and 10 minutes to go after this point. I suppose there might be a case of people seeing how god-awful the rest of the film wound up being, which made them look back on the beginning scene more fondly, which I can sorta understand, but I gotta be honest with you guys, there were several major red flags all throughout these first 20 minutes that already had me very worried for how the rest of this was gonna turn out. What were those red flags, you ask? Well, here are the two biggest ones: insane levels of luck and seemingly indestructible plot armor. Let me give you an example. When the Nazis capture Indy, they tie a noose around his neck and he starts to hang to death. He's literally seconds away from suffocating. It seems like all hope is lost, but then a random bomb just falls out of the sky and crashes into the room, does not immediately detonate, and then slowly sinks down through the floor and drops several levels below where Indy is, at which point it then explodes and lights up the entire room like a firework, and literally every single person surrounding Indy dies, but Indiana Jones himself somehow survives without a scratch. He isn't even hit by any stray shrapnel, he's just totally fine. This was a double whammy oh no moment for me. This is the very first significant event in the film. The first situation we see Indiana Jones having found himself in less than 5 minutes into the story, and we already see him having an absolutely ridiculous amount of both plot armor and luck. Especially because there's no reason why they should have even dragged him up to the top of this tower to hang him in the first place instead of just executing him on the spot. And this proceeds throughout the entire rest of the opening sequence. What, you thought they'd only pull the bomb fell out of the sky trick once? Ha! No! When we get to the train set piece and Indy and Basil are running along the top to escape the Nazis chasing them from behind, there's a turret on this train that, yet again, a random bomb comes crashing down on, only this time it's much worse because said bomb falling on this turret causes it to rotate itself around toward the train cars behind them and shoot down literally every single one of the Nazis, both inside and outside the train. Of course, it runs out of ammo right as they go to cross over the turret, and none of the gunfire or bombs dropping from the sky or anything ever comes anywhere close to hitting Indy. Not like it would make much of a difference since they already made it pretty clear that the man is apparently immune to bombs going off 2 inches away from him. Oh, also, I need to rewatch the film again to be sure, but I am almost positive that the villain teleports ahead of them to catch up, because there's this whole elaborate sleight of hand trick where Indy walks into a train car full of Nazis as Big Boss Battle Man enters from the other direction, then Indy sits down with a plate of food with his back facing Boss Man so they pass by him, then stop at the train car behind this one discovering a bunch of their soldiers trapped inside, and yell at them to climb along the side of the train to catch up with Indy. He is obviously very far behind Indiana Jones, and he only goes on to gain even more distance between the two of them as he and Basil run along the top of the train, especially as the turret is bombed out and set on fire, creating a massive obstacle between them, yet somehow he just magically teleports in front of them on top of the train so they can have their big boss fight. There's no possible way he could have gotten in front of him unless he actually has the powers of teleportation. But then it gets worse, because Indy summons more of his plot armor as a train goes through a tunnel and Boss Man literally presses him to the top of the tunnel and his back grinds against the ceiling and he's just fine. Yeah, it's not like having your back pressed against the roof of a tunnel while traveling at the speed of a locomotive train would have any effect on your body whatsoever. And they have this whole one-on-one melee scuffle where Boss Man is clearly trying to kill Indy only for him to eventually pull out a gun that Indy whips away from him, which begs the question of why you didn't just pull out the gun to begin with if you wanted to kill him. You could have shot them both dead before they even knew you were there, but nope, you decided to challenge Indiana Jones in a melee battle. What a brilliant idea. And now for the absolute worst part. After they defeat Boss Man, we're introduced to our real villain of the movie, who is so unremarkable in every way I literally do not know what his name is, and frankly, I don't care. He demands Indy give him the dial, or else he's gonna shoot him, so he tosses him something that is not the dial as a distraction as a metal pole is fast approaching from the side of the train, so Basil yells at Indy to jump over it, which he does. No? This is like Far From Home's dumbass bus scene. If you jump up while standing on top of a vehicle that is traveling at dangerously high speeds, you are not going to fall down right where you left off. The train will move on without you and you'll tumble very far backwards. But that's nothing compared to what happens to the villain, who gets absolutely slammed in the face by this thing and goes careening off the side of the train, and my immediate thought was, well, He's dead. Like, he's actually dead, though. It's the same thing that happened to Dennis in the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, only instead of propelling through the water at David Hasselhoff's speed, he's traveling on a damn train, blasting through the world, and miraculously, this guy actually survives and goes on to become the villain of the film. Do not ask me how, I have absolutely no idea. They don't even show him with a scar or any kind of visible damage to indicate that yes, he did, in fact, get his face smashed in and then proceed to fly off the train. And this is the chunk of the movie that everyone's been praising to high heaven. This is what people are regarding as peak Indiana Jones content. This is not peak Indiana Jones content. This feels like an AI tried to replicate the broad strokes of what an Indiana Jones film might look like and failed spectacularly in the process. A lot of people told me this felt like classic Indiana Jones with how it's shot and staged, but no? Like, not even slightly? One of my favorite things about the classic movies is that they were not afraid to let the camera rest on a shot. They show you wide angles of Indiana Jones leaping across the gap to land on the tank, or snaking under the truck, or outrunning pursuers in the speedboat. They didn't just cut between a million different shots to make things seem more intense than they were. Now, granted, there's no sequence in this film that reaches Mulan 2020 levels of can you please calm the fuck down, but it's still quite clear that they very often fall back on frantically cutting between several shots in a short period of time to make the action seem like it's faster and more intense than it really is. It may appear more frantic because of this choice, but that doesn't make it feel any more gripping or engaging. In fact, it accomplishes the exact opposite effect. I am much more pulled into an action scene if you let me get a good look at everything that's happening instead of trying to give me an epileptic seizure to artificially enhance the tension of your scene, especially when the actual content of the scenes themselves is riddled with nonsense and insane levels of luck and contrivance. And yet, in spite of all that, I would still agree that it is easily the best part of the film. Marginally speaking, so you can imagine how well that bodes for the rest of this dumpster fire. The very next thing we see after the prologue is done is Indy waking up in his apartment in his underwear because one of his next door neighbors is blasting loud music through their speakers, so he grabs a baseball bat and goes next door to yell at them to turn the music down. I wish I was joking, but this is actually our reintroduction to the character of Indiana Jones in the present timeline of the story. I thought having him crammed into the trunk of a car in Crystal Skull was bad enough, but this is a whole new level of stupid. Because you may remember that in the first 4 movies, Indy had a lovely little home to call his own, but now he's crammed into a crappy New York City apartment. How did this happen? Well, the movie never actually fills in the gaps for you as to how we got from here to here. You're left to do that on your own. I can't imagine it was because of money, because he was promoted to being the associate dean of the university at the end of the last movie, so unless they forgot about that, this probably wasn't a financially motivated decision. This seems to be a result of him trying to distance himself from the life he used to have as a result of his family being fractured, because Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny completely annihilates the happily ever after he found with Marion at the end of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I'm not even gonna bother trying to create a dramatic build-up to this reveal. The movie shell-shocked me with this shit, and now I'm gonna shell-shock you. Indy and Marion are getting divorced because their son is fucking dead. He's gone. He just died off camera between movies because he enlisted in the Vietnam War. He wasn't drafted, he voluntarily chose to sign up and serve in the war, and now he's dead. This decision just started setting off every possible alarm bell I had in my brain, desperately trying to warn me something was very wrong with this movie. Why would you do this? Genuinely, what is the thought process here? Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is an awful, awful movie, but you know what? Its ending actually meant something. All the preceding events were completely stupid and laughably incompetent, but if nothing else, it at least gave Indy and Marion the wedding people were rooting for, and their family had been reunited. It was a nice way to cap things off for the character, even if it wasn't nearly as satisfying as this shot from The Last Crusade. But now they've ripped all of that away from him. Everything that could have possibly gone wrong in Indy's life has gone wrong. Why the hell did you kill off Mutt? Look, I know, nobody liked him in Crystal Skull, but good lord, why? Why would you do this to Indy? You weren't forced to work with this situation. Just because Shia LaBeouf didn't want to come back doesn't mean you couldn't have recast him. Or if you didn't want to do that, you could have just had him off in some foreign country exploring the world, living his life, divorced from the main story. The only reason I could possibly conceive of for why this was all set up the way that it was is because they wanted Indy's life to be as miserable as humanly possible. He's living in a crappy apartment with noisy neighbors who he hates. He's divorced from the love of his life. He still teaches at a university, but not a single student in his classroom gives even half a damn about anything he's talking talking about when all his students loved him in the original trilogy for one reason or another, and his son is dead. And you might argue that they wanted to start him out at rock bottom and slowly build him back up to the top, but no, they don't. He's just a grumpy old man throughout the whole movie who never grows or learns anything until they awkwardly try to force a happy ending in literally the last 3 minutes. And oh, don't you worry, we'll be getting to that crap soon enough. The marketing made it seem like Indy would be feeling down in the dumps as his life has mellowed out over the years, only to then feel revitalized at the thought of going on one last adventure, chasing down the rush of the glory days, sort of like The Incredibles. But no, that's not at all what happens, actually. He just gets dragged around from scene to scene, hating everyone and everything because for some reason a lot of writers' ideas for what an old man is allowed to be in a story starts and stops at, "I want to die, everything sucks." And it doesn't even make any sense for Mutt's character to go serve in the war. He was all about going against the grain, standing against the system, just doing his thing. It's why he didn't want to go to college. He wasn't going to become a part of the assembly line America was trying to perpetuate. He was passionate about fixing motorcycles, and that's what he wanted to do with his life. I do not at all believe this character would have risked his life to fight in the war. The only reasoning the movie provides is that Mutt did it to piss off Indy. Yeah, you know, just casually risking your life by joining the army just to spite your dad. Like we've all done at some point, I'm sure. But even if you bought that as a valid reason logically, conceptually, and emotionally, it's still possibly the worst choice they could have gone with for this story. If they really wanted Mutt to die, it would have been far more impactful if Indy had been the one to encourage his son to join the army, because obviously Mutt wouldn't have had any natural desire to do it himself. Then you would have Indy burdened by the emotional baggage of feeling guilty that he sent his son to die. If you really wanted to make Indy as downtrodden as possible, that would have been the way to do it while keeping everyone in character. But no, instead you chose what might be the stupidest possible reasoning for why any of this is happening at all. And even if we ignore all of that, Indy's general behavior throughout the main adventure is absolutely pathetic. He's either making horribly stupid decisions, being a grumpy old cactus prick, sitting around doing literally nothing, or compromising all his fundamental character values, which we will be sure to cover a bit later in the video. One of the most frustrating sequences is when they're on the boat talking about whether Indy believes in magic. You know, this dialogue from the trailer.
A few times in my life, I've seen things I can't explain.
Well, believe it or not, it's exactly as stupid in the actual movie as it was there.
I don't believe in magic.
Shut up! You absolutely would believe in magic. It doesn't make any sense that you wouldn't. You have seen magical events happen right before your eyes in every single one of these goddamn movies. You've seen the spirits of the dead incinerate Nazis. You've seen magical stones burn through your satchel through nothing more than the power of a magical incantation which you yourself recited. You were forced to drink the blood of Kali, which completely took over your cognitive volition. You were tortured with voodoo. You watched your father's life be saved by the healing power of the Holy Grail, and you came face to face with interdimensional beings. After all the bullshit you have endured, there is absolutely no way this character would not believe in magic unless he was too stupid to understand what was happening in front of him, or he was too obtuse and set in his ways to entertain the possibility of magical powers, and neither of those possibilities are things that I believe Indiana Jones would ever be. And before anyone brings it up, yes, I do remember this line from Raiders of the Lost Ark.
I don't believe in magic, a lot of superstitious hocus pocus.
Which is obviously not true because Temple of Doom takes place before Raiders, so by this point in his life, he definitely should believe in superstitious hocus pocus. They obviously weren't thinking about writing the sequel when making this first movie, which is why this doesn't match up all that well. But yes, this does also annoy me because it is still a blatant contradiction. However, Dial of Destiny doesn't have the benefit of being the first movie in the series unaware of what future sequels were going to do. The people who wrote this were fully aware of everything that's happened throughout this series, which makes it even more ridiculous to hear him say that line after experiencing even more magical events throughout both Last Crusade and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And then there's this dumbass line.
I've come to believe it's not so much what you believe, it's how hard you believe it.
What the hell? hell does that mean? Do you honestly think that if you sat the writers down in a room, they'd be able to explain what they just wrote? Because I certainly don't. It's not what you believe, it's how hard you believe it. What the fuck? What? That is not in any way supported by anything that's happened throughout your life, and it doesn't make any sense by itself. And you know what the worst part is? It's not like the writers forgot about the other movies or are trying to subtly decanonize Temple of Doom, because this dialogue
I'm gonna torture you with voodoo.
is in the movie.
I'm gonna torture you with voodoo. Torture with voodoo. 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 Voodoo.
How the fuck do you write that in the same movie where you claim you don't believe in magic? What is this film? Did you have no self-awareness when you were making this? What is going on? Oh, and I also love the scene where he and Helena were in the cave and they suddenly got swarmed by a horde of CGI bugs of all shapes and sizes, and he freaks the hell out over them like Willy from Temple of Doom. Even though it was made quite clear in the original movies, the only thing he was afraid of was snakes, and they reinforced this several times with every other creepy critter they ever come across. I guess they just forgot that for this movie because we gotta make Indy as pathetic as possible. To be honest with you, I never really liked any of the creepy critter scenes and everything after Raiders because that was the only one that actually felt like it had narrative purpose, and all the others just seemed to be included out of an obligation to check the gross out scene box. But it's especially bad in Dial of Destiny because it shows Indy actually being afraid of things he has never been scared of before. Also, I've been thinking about this recently. To all you Star Wars fans out there, I'm sorry. I get it now. Look, I don't give a shit about Star Wars, never have, never will, it's not my thing. Lego Star Wars is peak, but I've never particularly liked any of the movies, so I've stayed out of any and all discussions pertaining to their quality, and specifically that of the sequel trilogy. But I did still see those movies when they came out in theaters, and thinking back about how Han Solo was portrayed in The Force Awakens, I finally understand how painful it must have been for you guys to watch that movie. Because how Indiana Jones is portrayed in Dial of Destiny is basically beat for beat exactly the same as how Han Solo is portrayed in that one. I might even argue it's a little bit worse, but regardless, they're both aging heroes who the world has seemingly forgotten about and whose marriage was ripped apart because they lost their son. It's actually insane to me thinking about how they basically just did the exact same thing again. What is this trend with writers shitting all over beloved characters from classic and highly respected films? I am not at all one for conspiracy theories, but this has happened so consistently with so many franchises, I'm legitimately starting to wonder if there's some ulterior motive. Because what do you possibly serve to gain from dragging legacy characters people adore through the mud?
Resourceful, daring, beautiful, self-sufficient!
Alright, that's what you get. Because, you see, Harrison Ford is old, and he can't play the character of Indiana Jones forever, but the franchise of Indiana Jones is far too profitable for us to let it die with him, so we need to introduce a new character who we can copy and paste all of Indy's attributes onto without putting any effort into it whatsoever. Actually, no, copy and paste implies Indy still gets to keep those traits. It's more like cut and paste, because make no mistake, Indiana Jones is not the main character of this Indiana Jones movie. Helena Shaw is. This is her movie. In every single action scene, the one driving the action forward is her. In every single puzzle scene with one exception, and that exception mysteriously happening to be one of a very small amount of clips they released as marketing for the movie, go figure, she's the one deducing the clues and figuring out what they need to do next. But rather than just making their own Indiana Jones spin-off, they decided to make Indiana Jones 5 and ostensibly present Indy as the leading star to get more people into the theater, and then drag him down as low as possible to prop up their new hero in the hopes to pass the torch to her for the future. It's so infuriatingly transparent, and the clearest example is the awful scene on the boat. For a bit of context, after they dive down into the sea to retrieve a map thing, the Nazis hijack the boat and demand that Indy translates the information on the map to point them towards the second half of the dial, and Indy refuses to do so. Which already pissed me off because of everybody on that boat. If there's one character who absolutely should not refuse to translate this map, it would be Indiana Jones, because this exact thing happened in The Last Crusade and it nearly cost his father his life. And what do you know, Indy says no, and so Dennis shoots Piss in Boots in the... Piss Pissin' Boots. Okay, that was legitimately a typo in the script because he's played by Antonio Banderas, but I'm just gonna roll with it because fuck this movie. He shoots Pissin' Boots in the kneecap and then kills him outright. And that death rests squarely on Indy's shoulders for refusing to speak up. Now you may say, well, what did you want him to do? Guide the Nazis to the dial? That's a very dangerous idea. Yes, I agree. It is a bad idea that he shouldn't commit to. So here's a thought. How about you just translated incorrectly? The Nazis cannot verify if what you tell them is actually correct or not until they get there, obviously, because otherwise they wouldn't need your help to translate it in the first place. So just agree to help so no one on this boat dies and then make up some bullshit. Indy is intelligent and knowledgeable enough to be able to concoct a lie that sounds believable enough given the circumstances but is still way off base from the truth. But no, he doesn't do that, even though Indy's always been demonstrated as being a character capable of thinking of clever solutions on his feet, including in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Get this guy. Who? Joe College hit him hard.
That's my boyfriend!
Get that greaser!
He doesn't do that. And why doesn't he do that? Well, I'll tell you why. It's so that Helena can be the one to do exactly what I just suggested and save the day. As soon as Pissin' Boots dies, Helena suddenly leaps to her feet and agrees to translate the map for Dennis for a price. First of all, if you wanted to make this character likable, you should have had her speak up after he was shot in the knee, not after he was killed. Doing the former tells me your top priority above all else is to protect the people in this boat, and then you'll deal with the consequences of relinquishing valuable information later. The latter tells me you're just trying to save your own ass and nothing else. Second, bit of a tangent. Why are these scenes so goddamn boring now? Every time the characters had to figure something like this out in the original movies, it was paced and structured in a much more dynamic and intriguing way than literally having a character just walk around the interior of a boat monologuing. This feels more in line with the tomb scene from Kingdom of the Crystal Skull than, say, the X marks the spot scene from The Last Crusade. Third, as I said, this is the perfect example of what the writers were prioritizing. Helena confidently and arrogantly struts around the boat explaining the translation and what it means in the context of geography while Indy sits around on his ass twiddling his thumbs. The most he does is light the dynamite she holds behind her back she's gonna use to blow up the ship. That's it. All the cerebral deductions are done entirely by her, and when they escape the situation, she still has to walk him through the rest of the puzzle. And just so we're clear, I'm not advocating for a reverse of the current scene where Indy does all the work and Helena sits around doing nothing. I'm saying you should have them both work together to get out of this. They can both contribute pieces of information and bounce false translations back and forth between the two of them, and you can still keep the thing where one of them keeps the Nazis distracted while the other sets up the dynamite. But no, it's all on Helena because this isn't Indy's story anymore. Am I about to praise Toy Story 4? Yes, I am about to praise Toy Story 4. That's how much this movie pissed me off. One of the biggest issues with Toy Story 4 is how Bo Peep is portrayed. I'm not gonna get into all the ways in which she stumbles over the values and principles she believed in throughout the original trilogy. Though if you want to hear about it, as well as a lot of other things, and you got 6 hours to spare, well, you know, what's relevant for this video is the way in which she interacts with Woody. Nearly every scene is spent showing how well-adjusted Bo is and how absolutely crap Woody is, and it's really annoying because Bo is just categorically wrong about everything nearly 100% of the time, and the film seems completely unaware of that, throwing Woody under the bus for making the absolute best possible choice at every available opportunity. But you know what Toy Story 4 doesn't do? It doesn't pretend like Woody is some bitter old man who wants to die and needs to let Bo do all the work. He is still clearly the main character. He is who the writers were prioritizing above all else, to varying degrees of success, and he is the core reason why the plot progresses forward. In fact, if Bo had it her way, they never would have even gone on this crazy rescue mission in the first place. But once they do, Bo doesn't need to do everything for Woody. He's leaping across the gap. She's fighting the dummies. He's wrestling the cats. She's obstructing the path for their pursuance. See what I'm getting at here? He's working together with Bo to accomplish things like Keanu Reeves' greatest stunt. Toy Story 4 isn't the Bo Peep show that only keeps Woody around out of obligation while they try to set up a Bo Peep spin-off movie. Woody is just as integral to the narrative as Bo is. Now, what the narrative does with his character is still offensively awful, but at least it doesn't treat him like an obstacle they're forced to deal with. Dial of Destiny, on the other hand, genuinely seems to have a mean-spirited contempt for Indy Indiana Jones and is solely interested in propelling Helena into the spotlight. There's even a line where she says, word for word, "He's not in charge, I'm in charge, ho-ho." Full-on mask-off moment right there. Not that they ever did a particularly great job wearing it in the first place. But I got news for you. If you need to drag other characters down in order to lift yours up, they aren't someone who deserves to be lifted up in the first place. Athena Sykes, Rivet, Jesse, all characters introduced in a sequel that join the main cast that do not have to belittle, demean, or devalue the importance of the characters we're already attached to and whose name is in the fucking title. But nearly every scene Helena is in with Indy is spent trying to establish how much better she is at everything and how old and crappy he is. Which is something Toy Story 4 did as well, just without the old part.
Wow, this toy sounds like a complete idiot.
He does.
But Dial of Destiny goes a step above Toy Story 4 because while Bo's morality is certainly questionable in that movie, to say the least, at the end of the day, she is still on Woody's side. She's upfront and honest with him, or at least she believes she's being upfront and honest with him, and never betrays him. Whereas I legitimately thought towards the beginning of this film that Helena was being set up as the villain, or at least Indy's rival for the story. And I promise you, I am not being overdramatic when I say that. I need you guys to understand this. The first major thing she does in this movie is lie to Indy about what she wants and why she's here, steal the dial after he retrieves it from the archives for her, and then when the Nazis break into the room to try to get it for themselves, she literally locks Indy in a room with these people and leaves him for dead. But the Nazis aren't after him, you may say. They're after her, that's why she's running away. Yeah, you're right, they're only interested in her. I'm sure the Nazis of current day wouldn't have any bones to pick with Dr. Jones for any reason whatsoever. They'll get along like a house on fire, I'm sure of it. But regardless, she still knows for a fact that they are coming after her, and she should assume by default that these people would either be willing to kill or capture him just the same as you, especially now that they know you are affiliated with him. This is her introduction to the audience, trapping Indy in a room full of Nazis after lying to him like, sorry, not sorry, gotta eat to live, gotta still to eat, tell you all about it when I got the time! And this has to be a conscious choice on her part. There's absolutely no reason she couldn't have waited one extra second to lock the door until Indy got through, yet she still doesn't do it. Like, genuinely, how am I supposed to root for this character? Are you not his goddaughter? Are you not family? What are you doing?
Didn't you pay attention? He was an absent father figure. She doesn't have any obligation to help him.
Okay, first of all, that doesn't justify literally leaving him for dead. Second of all, Dial of Destiny made all of that up out of thin air, and pointing that out only goes on to highlight another problem I have with this piece of shit film. The idea that Indy, as her godfather, would be an absent father figure is such a massive spit in the face to his character. The entirety of The Last Crusade had Indy being royally upset at Henry for how distant his father was in his life. You cannot convince me he would ever let that happen to someone he has a familial relationship with. The only reason he was estranged from Mutt for so long is because he literally didn't know he existed, and it's also why he was so upset at Marion for never telling him he had a son. And don't even get me started on the line where she says, I don't need a morality lesson from an aging grave robber. Don't tell me all your escapades were noble, selfless quests. You did it for the buzz. Oh my gosh, shut up! Shut the fuck up, you actual burnt french fry. Did you all just forget about Temple of Doom? Indy had the perfect chance to leave that place completely scot-free. He could have grabbed the stones and run for the hills without ever looking back, but he didn't. You know why? Because he saw these children were being enslaved and had the moral backbone to do something about it. Not content to leave until every single one of them was freed.
Now let's get out of here.
Right. All of us.
He saved an entire village full of children, and that was a pivotal part of his growth in that film. At the start, he's really only interested in pursuing the stones and not much else. He doesn't have any stake in the plight of the people in this village who he's just met. But once he sees the hellish conditions these kids are being subjected to, he sets out to make things right and reunite them with their families. Get off your soapbox right now, you insufferable gopher. You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. about, and you certainly have no room to be criticizing him for jack shit when you storming into Indy's life led the Nazis to infiltrate the university and murder 2 innocent people in the process. And for the love of God, this bitch is whooping and hollering as they make their escape from the boat, even though Pissin' Boots, Indy's friend, was shot to death right in front of them. The only reason he died was because he agreed to help your sorry ass with your stupid little treasure hunt, and you're acting like you just won the World Cup. And then, when you get to your next destination in the middle of a highly populated foreign city, you leave your child sidekick all alone, which results in him getting kidnapped. Why am I supposed to like her? Please, tell me one solitary thing about this character that is supposed to endear me to her. Even just one. Anything. Does she save zebras in her spare time, maybe? Why is she so awful? Hey, you know this line from earlier?
Resourceful, daring, beautiful, self-sufficient!
Tell me something. Has a well-written character ever had to spell out all their valuable contributions to the world? No, they haven't. No character ever worth anything has needed to explicitly tell other people how awesome they are. Hey, do you guys remember Marion's introduction in Raiders of the Lost Ark? Did she ever have to say to Indy, "How dare you challenge someone as resourceful, daring, beautiful, and self-sufficient as I?" No, she didn't. The movie showed us that she was all of those things. They showed us that she had a very successful bar. They showed us she knew how to swindle people with how long she could hold her liquor. They showed us she had the guts to stand up to the Nazis and the perceptiveness to realize that something wasn't quite right when they burst through the door, trying to stall for time, and they showed her helping Indy throughout the entire adventure, as even if she didn't have the physical combat experience as Indy, she had the brains to outsmart her opponents. And at no point did she ever have to vomit out her character traits to the audience because she was actually a well-written character. This shit is both lazy and cringe. They even sink so low as to have a conversation where Indy and Helena literally get into a "no he didn't, yes he did, no he didn't, yes he did" argument like 3-year-olds in the playground. Speaking of 3-year-olds, I hate this child. I hate him. Please punt him across the world. He's absolutely insufferable to watch, and you just want to punch him in the face every second he's on screen. But short round was— No, shut up. Everyone always dunks on Temple of Doom for having an annoying kid as a sidekick, but I've had it up to here with this line of reasoning. I will tolerate absolutely no short round slander. Rewatch Temple of Doom if you haven't seen it in a while. He's not an annoying child. He's hilarious, he's endearing, he actually impacts the plot in significant ways as he has several major hero moments all to himself. He's the one to free Indy from the black sleep of Kali. He has this epic stunt. He's just as important and active to the story as Indiana Jones. And his relationship with Indy, both in and out of the movie, is heart-melting to watch unfold. Short round is awesome. Deal with it. Because he is a prime example of how to write a young character surrounded by adults and have him be competent and compelling. This little shit is the polar opposite of that in every possible way. He's just an annoying cock who only serves to fly a plane in the climax, which is its own can of worms we'll open later. He just belittles Indy every chance he gets, and the fact that they expect me to care when he gets kidnapped is legitimately laughable. Helena's getting a lot of hate online, but I might have actually been more aggravated by this kid than I was by her. Speaking of which, I've seen a lot of people online specifically targeting Phoebe Waller-Bridge as an actress and a person for playing this character, even going as far as to go after her physical appearance, which is just not cool. None of you are affiliated with me. It's not her fault Helena's an absolute piece of shit. She didn't write the character, she just played the part. And she did a great job of portraying such a horrifically bad person. The character sucks, but it has nothing to do with the actress behind the role. Make no mistake though, the character is absolutely terrible. And the thing is, you don't even really need her. There's already a character who's perfectly set up to be Indy's partner for this adventure. The CIA agent. I don't remember her name because I don't know the names of half the people in this goddamn movie, including the main villain, but who cares? He's Dennis. He survived being splatted and flung off the train. They do this thing with her where she believes she's working with other government agents only to witness Dennis and his men murder 2 witnesses in cold blood, and she's like, "We don't kill people." And then they're like, "No witnesses." And instead of capitalizing off that obvious setup to have her defect and cooperate with Indy to get the dial and stop the Nazis, she just continues to work with them, which already doesn't make sense. You'd think that the CIA agent would have arrested her teammates as soon as they killed the 2 witnesses as she realized something wasn't right here and not continued their partnership like it was all totally normal, but whatever. She keeps working alongside them and ultimately gets betrayed and murdered by Dennis. Amazing. What a waste of a character. She was actually interesting and likable and had, A moral compass? Helena doesn't tick any of those boxes. Why did you throw away this character like she was nothing instead of leveraging the obvious setup for the story? Why? The entire CIA subplot, as it stands, was just a complete waste of time that goes nowhere and changes nothing. Oh yeah, and about those murders. Oh my God, this is one of the stupidest parts of the whole movie. Everything I just talked about is all in reference to the characters. I haven't even opened the can of worms that is this film's absolutely batshit crazy stupid plot, ignoring the fact that this 2.5 hour long movie drags so much and is padded to hell with shots and scenes that last way longer than they need to and plot beats that go absolutely nowhere, as opposed to the tightly written, perfectly paced movies of Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Last Crusade, where not a single second of screen time was wasted and everything served a purpose. This story just straight up does not make sense, and one of the earliest indications of that is the entire situation with these murders. So Dennis, or one of his men, I don't remember and I don't care, shoots down 2 people at the university, and when Indy breaks out of the archives, he stumbles upon the corpses and then touches the corpses with his bare hands. Which, okay, look, if he was just checking for their pulse to confirm that they're dead, that would be one thing. I still think he wouldn't be so stupid as to get his DNA on a possible murder victim, but I can let it slide. What I absolutely will not let slide is that as he checks the victim's pulse, he puts his hand on her bloody gunshot wound and literally gets blood all over his hands, and then he grabs the phone with his bloody hands that now has his fingerprints all over it to call for help. It's just, I can't, are you serious? How stupid can you possibly be? Are you sure I'm still watching the same sharp-witted adventurer from the original trilogy? Like, come on. Oh, and then during his runaway attempt from both the police and the Nazis, his grand escape plan is to hop on a subway right as the doors are closing. Like, aha, the doors have shut, you cannot reach me now. Ha ha ha! Yeah, Indy, you really outsmarted them this time. It's not like you're on a subway that makes regular stops, which can be easily predicted, and therefore they could just go to the nearest station to cut you off, you absolute dumbass. Also, my god, it sure is a good thing he didn't start charging towards this train slightly too late, or else he'd have had nowhere to run. And it sure is a good thing that he arrived at this subway right as the doors were about to close. The amount of luck and contrivance pushing this story forward is insane, and you might say, well, hang on, Indy got lucky in the original trilogy too. And yeah, he did from time to time, but he didn't get this unbelievably lucky this often all the time. And there was usually more going on in those movies beyond the solution just happening to fall in his lap. Like, yeah, it's convenient Indy regained control of his body right before he was about to get crushed to death, but that happened because Short Round was actively fighting the Maharaja to pull out the knife from the voodoo doll. It's a result of cause and effect. Yeah, it's lucky that this guy got shot and fell onto the controls to move the tank out of the way before he was crushed against the wall, but that's also a direct result of the scuffle between Henry, Brody, and the Nazis happening inside the tank. And most importantly, Indy acts on this luck. When he's given these opportunities, he seizes them through actions he has direct control over to gain the upper hand. Yeah, it's fortunate that there's a vine or something he can grab onto to prevent himself from falling to his death in the Temple of the Idol, but that doesn't mean much if he doesn't have the physical capabilities to pull himself up and escape before the door shuts. None of that is in this movie. It's just, oh, good thing the doors closed in time, good thing a bomb just happened to fall on the turret and turn around to shoot down everybody on the train except you. And then there's also contrivance in the other direction, like at the upcoming auction scene, where literally all of the major characters arrive at this place at this exact same time. All the good guys and all the bad guys, they all just simultaneously converge on the auction with no deeper consideration beyond, they're here, I guess. And the same thing happens again later with the boat. The Nazis show up seconds after Indy and the team recover the map, and had they showed up just a minute or two later, the film would have been over. It's just so lame. So you'd imagine by this point that Indy's screwed, right? Helena's halfway around the world trying to sell this immensely historically important artifact to some black market auction, and the TV stations are already broadcasting how Indy is wanted for the murder of the 2 people back at the university. Well, actually, no. He's able to go through the airport and board a plane without anybody giving a singular shit. Nobody at the airport or on the plane stops him or notices him, even though he would have had to show his goddamn passport to get on an international flight in the first place. Keep in mind, this is not a private plane. Indy literally just goes to the regular airport and boards a normal plane like anybody else would. They just showed not one scene ago that this is all over news networks, and there was one guy watching the TV through the window alongside Indy, and he immediately recognized him as the guy who's wanted for murder? Why would you intentionally put in a scene demonstrating how easily he can be recognized in public? That only hurts your story. Oh, was it so you could give Sala a big heroic MCU introduction where he knocks his lights out? Well, let me tell ya, it worked. My theater clapped like seals when he came on screen, so congratulations, you got exactly what you wanted. Unfortunately, I was too distracted by how little sense all this was making to care about Sala, especially since his presence wasn't at all a surprise, seeing as how he was in the very first trailer you ever showed off. Also, Sala's role in this story is nothing more than a cameo. He shows up to punch the guy watching the TV, tells Indy where he needs to go next like an NPC in an open-world RPG who somehow has literally all the exposition Indy could ever possibly need, like a one-stop Google shop in the 1960s, despite there never being any sort of reasoning for how he knows all this stuff, and then he disappears from the movie until the very end. Which I find interesting, because apparently Sala was originally supposed to be at Indy's wedding in Crystal Skull, but the actor turned it down because he felt the character was worth more to the audience than a cameo like that. Oh really? Being there for Indy's wedding didn't meet your standards, but showing up for 5 seconds to deliver the next quest did? Okay, fuck off. They even bait you by saying that Sala brought his passport to the airport because he wants to join Indy on his adventure and help him, but he just doesn't. Why? What reason is there for him to not come with you? Why would someone as closely related to Indy as he is, who values their relationship quite highly,
These are my friends. They are my family. I will get of it if they are not treated well.
who in this very movie says that Indy helped their family get to America during the war, why would he be content to stand on the sidelines while Indy's future is on the line and he's going off to prove his innocence? And also, it doesn't even take a whole lot of convincing for Sala to stay behind. Indy's just like, this is not an adventure, even though it very obviously is. And then Sala's like, alright then, give him hell, Indiana Jones! Oh my god, and that's the other thing. Indiana Jones is wanted for murder, his face is on TV everywhere, people know his name, and he just screams at the top of his lungs outside a public airport.
Give him hell, Indiana Jones!
And nobody even bats an eye. It's so stupid. But then again, we already had one legacy character threatening to interfere with Helena's spotlight. We wouldn't want to risk throwing another one into the mix. Then when he arrives at the auction, we get this stupid scene from the trailers where Indy swings his whip around the room and everyone just shoots at him because obviously, but when he ducks to avoid the gunfire, not a single one of them lowers their guns to adjust their aim. Like Halo 2 levels of enemy AI. It's so bad. But don't you see? It's actually a genius inversion of this scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark, where now Indy's the one without a gun and he's getting shot at. Yeah, see, the thing about that scene is that you'll notice the person with the gun wins the battle, because of course he does. But that does not apply to this scene, even though it very much should. Look, I'm not gonna do a scene-by-scene breakdown of the entire film. I think you get the general gist by this point, and I don't have the footage or the patience to go beat by beat, so I'm just gonna jump ahead to the start of the third act, because that's the point at which everything just flies completely off the rails, and it's also the part of the movie that got the most viscerally angry reaction out of me. So after a whole lot of bullshit shenanigans, Indy and Helena eventually find the dial, and the Nazis catch up to them, and so a battle for the dial commences, resulting in Indiana Jones being shot in the chest at a spot which appears to be right next to his heart, which initially made me think, oh my god, are they actually gonna kill off Indiana Jones? Are they gonna have the balls to do that? And the answer is no, they don't, but considering the stupidity that's about to unfold, holy crap, I honestly almost wish they did just kill him off. Against all logic, Indy miraculously manages to survive the entirety of the climax without receiving any medical attention for his gunshot wound. You'd think that would be one of the most important issues in the world, right? That Indy being shot within an inch of his heart and just being perfectly fine through all of this bullshit would be topping the charts of gaping problems with the script. And yet, somehow, no! I don't even know that it's in the top 5, because Indy getting shot in the chest marks the beginning of our transition into the third act of this movie, which is quite possibly the dumbest, most ludicrous, and most infuriatingly insulting finale to a film that I have ever seen in my entire life. I don't even know where to begin. Should I start with the fact that even though Indy is not at all vital to the success of the villain's plan, they still bring him with them rather than just killing him and leaving him in the cave? And at no point do they ever attempt to even lampshade this decision, let alone actually justify it? Or should I start with the fact that as soon as Indy's hauled away by Dennis, Helena's like, oh crikey, we can't just leave him, we gotta help him. Bitch, what? I can't believe you just said that! Do you remember the beginning of the movie when you locked him in a room and left left him for dead after lying to his face in pursuit of your own selfish desires? Remember when you left the kid on his own in the middle of Sicily and that led to him getting kidnapped because he literally fucking stumbled into the Nazis? What do you mean we can't leave him here? Where did this come from? I guess the idea is that it's supposed to show you she's grown over the course of the story, but I don't buy it at all because she was still acting like a twit nozzle not 10 minutes ago, if that, and there was never any kind of scene to even imply that she and Indy were starting to form a meaningful connection. I don't buy any of this. Oh, or maybe I should have started with the fact that this little fucking shit is able to fly a plane by himself in order to chase after the plane that Dennis and his men have Indy held hostage inside of. Huh? So in The Last Crusade, Indy is able to fly this plane, dangling off the blimp even though he said he didn't know how to fly in Temple of Doom, but at least there you could reasonably assume that in the 3-year period between the events of these movies, he learned how to pilot a plane specifically because of what happened in Temple of Doom. But in Dial of Destiny, they straight up have a line where the kid's like, "What? I've never flown this type of plane before." To which Helena says, "You've never flown any plane before." Why would you say that? Why would you ask if he can fly this specific plane when you know he's never flown any plane before? And why would the writers ever put that line into the movie? What were you thinking? You don't just jump into a plane and take off like it's no big deal. It takes years of training to do that. And even if you had some prior experience with aviation, different types of airplanes have different types of controls which require unique levels of mastery. What do you mean he's gonna fly this for the first time with no experience? But don't you see? Earlier in the movie, he was practicing the art of aviation with a simulated model at the auction. Now, fuck off, you dumbass movie. I don't care that he was pretending to fly with some science kit he got at Walmart. That is not even close to being the same thing as physically being behind the controls of an airplane. And it's actually much worse than this, because it's not even that the plane was just chilling there ready for operation. He is able to successfully hotwire the damn thing, and then manages to successfully take off in the middle of a torrential downpour. It's a biblical thunderstorm that has come over the airport, and he is somehow able to take off with zero issues whatsoever. And even with him overcoming that massive hurdle, he still has to maintain control of the plane and then eventually land it so he can pick up Indy and Helena at the end, who is currently chasing after the plane on a motorcycle like the climax of Toy Story 2. Oh, but don't worry everybody, because thankfully there happened to be a pilot asleep in the backseat of the plane who somehow didn't wake up when the plane was first taking off, or even just when the cockpit door opened, so he couldn't stop the kid from stealing the plane, but he could be awake to help him land it as well as prevent them from being stranded in the past. And the best part is it's all about to get so much worse. Indy's still bleeding out, by the way, in case you guys were wondering. The film doesn't seem to give a shit, but I sure do. I'm not gonna forget it no matter how hard they try to make me. Do you remember in Last Crusade when Henry was shot in the stomach and it was a big ass deal that put a palpable ticking clock on the scene, and he was clearly gasping for air, barely clinging to life throughout the entire climax? Yeah, nah. Indy's even older than that and is able to engage in all this bullshit after being nearly shot in the heart because his plot armor is practically bulletproof. Fantastic. And now it's time for them to actually activate the Dial of Destiny and send themselves back in time. I didn't want to believe it. I adamantly refused to accept the idea that the writers would ever entertain such a concept. I figured surely they wouldn't be so insane as to shove time travel into the story of Indiana Jones after they tried and failed to introduce aliens last time, because surely Disney wouldn't be that stupid. Fuck you, bitch! Time travel is real, and it's happening! I am dumbfounded that this is the direction they decided to take the Indiana Jones franchise for his final outing, but I promise you, the execution of this stupid time dial is substantially stupider than it sounds conceptually. They repeat yet another one of Crystal Skull's problems with what I call the softening. That movie introduced aliens into this universe complete with a flying saucer and everything. That's how the story was originally conceived of by George Lucas, and that's clearly what they wanted to portray with these things. But somewhere along the way, they must have realized how fucking stupid that was. Only instead of canning the entire movie like smart people, they just decided to soften the blow a little bit by saying, "What are they, spacemen?" And
interdimensional beings in point of fact.
As if that's any less idiotic of a concept to introduce. And they've done the exact same thing here, only it's actually much, much worse. Oh, don't you see, Dr. Jones? It's not a time machine. It's a device that can mathematically predict figures which you can use to travel through time. That's just as stupid! Stop it! Stop trying to minimize this. You know exactly what you're doing. Do not try to hide behind the shield of,
Well, actually, it's not magic, you see, it's a device of science and math.
you are still flying through a hole in the space-time continuum connecting 2 points in time together, and that does not change no matter what fancy wording you use. Also, this is literally just Manifest. A plane flying through a glow in the sky that sends them through time. Manifest is not a show you should be using as a blueprint for literally anything other than maybe a parody.
Did you even watch the other Indiana Jones movies? They always end with some super crazy final act. Why is time travel so hard for you to believe?
Because it's fucking time travel! There is a universal leap between supernatural entities and magical items and literally shattering the space-time continuum to pieces. But hey, you know what? I'm willing to say it is theoretically possible this could have been good. There are other stories that have introduced the concept of time travel without destroying everything, so there's no reason Indiana Jones couldn't have done the same so long as the writers actually put effort into making this all make sense. So, did they? Let's just rip this band-aid off. Okay, so Dennis runs his calculations and thinks he's sending himself back to 1939 to kill Hitler and make different choices than he did to lead the Nazis to victory. Which also means that the objective for Indiana Jones in this point in the movie is to save Hitler's life. Just fucking but due to failing to take continental drift into account, he ends up sending himself back in time to the Siege of Syracuse during 212 BCE. And we discover that, apparently, Archimedes created this time dial hoping someone would find it and use it to travel back in time to help them win this fight. Okay. First of all, hey, ding dong. What do you think's gonna happen when you change history in such a radically significant way? You delete yourself. You would cease to exist. The future you came from would no longer have happened, and therefore you would never have had a reason to go back in time to begin with. You're either going to create a time paradox, or you'll create an alternate timeline entirely removed from the reality you're trying to correct, or you're stuck in a time loop, and in all three of those possible time travel rule sets, you absolutely cannot accomplish the goal you're trying to achieve. Nothing can possibly change no matter what. It's the exact same thing as Lightyear did last year. Can we stop? Can we stop incessantly diving into time travel? Not a single one of you clowns wants to put the same level of attention that the writers of Back to the Future did into making all this make sense. Stop doing it. Second of all, how does continental drift have any impact whatsoever on portals that appear in the sky? Why do you even need the dial in order to see a giant ass hole in the sky? Can you not just look up? And literally, how is it possible for this guy to have figured out how to predict a time portal opening in the sky above him? He didn't create the portal, he just created a device that allowed whoever wields it to find a portal that takes you to this specific point in time? Is this the only portal? If so, then it is astronomically lucky that this is the singular time fissure in all of the universe, but if it's not, then that has massive implications for people just on regular flights that might accidentally find themselves sucked into these things. Finally, Archimedes' genius plan was to make a device in the hopes that maybe someone in the distant future would find both pieces of it, as well as the map that provided instructions to one of the two halves, somehow know it's a time dial, travel back to this exact point in time, and also come prepared with the necessary equipment in order to help win the war. Do you even need me to explain to you the amount of things that have to go right, and somehow actually do go right, in order for this all to fall in place and for them to get the help they need? But the worst part is that they don't even help them. They legitimately have zero impact on how this battle plays out. They fly in through the time fissure, the plane gets shot down by ballistas, Indy does some real stupid shit we'll get to in a minute, and then they leave. They don't help the army win the war, which makes this whole situation even stupider. What was the goddamn point of any of this? What are we doing? Who wrote this garbage? Also, even though a massive airplane, all their clothes, and a wristwatch is left in the past, this future technology apparently has absolutely zero impact on the progression of civilization, even though that's just not how humans work. They would have reverse engineered this stuff and the future would be radically changed forever. And if you argue Archimedes, who created the time dial in the first place, would have been buried this stuff specifically to prevent that, someone would have still found it eventually through just naturally digging around. Also, you can't just hide a massive airplane from everyone on this battlefield. It's a plane! People are gonna know it's there. They can see it. It's in the fucking sky. It's right there! Which brings us to what is easily the worst scene in the entire godforsaken movie, featuring that stupid shit I alluded to a moment ago. A scene that left me breathlessly mortified. After Indy and Helena pull some Mission Impossible bullshit to escape the plane, during which Indy is still bleeding out, they parachute down onto a beach below, and rather than hopping on board the kid's plane as soon as it touches down and getting the hell out of here, Indy, and I swear to God, I am not kidding you, Indy tells Helena to leave him behind and let him become a part of history. And they bait you throughout the entire scene for what feels like an eternity at the prospect of him leaving his present time forever in favor of slowly bleeding out this far in the past. I swear to you, I thought they were gonna do it. I honestly thought they were gonna commit to this choice. But they don't, because Helena is afraid that Indy staying behind would create a time paradox, and so she literally knocks him unconscious and forcibly drags him onto the plane, and then the very next scene is him waking up back in his apartment totally fine. I cannot even begin to express to you how fucking furious I was watching this scene play out. There's such a massive list of problems to go through here, it's almost insurmountable. So first of all, I'm not actually convinced that him staying behind would have created a time paradox, because when they find the other half of the dial, the tomb they come across has depictions of a phoenix with propellers, that being the airplane that flies through the time fissure, and there's a watch inside implying that the way the time travel works in this universe is as a time loop, because events which they have yet to experience in the present have already happened in the past because they were always destined to travel back in time, thus making it impossible for any time paradoxes to actually occur. Anything which previously occurred in the timeline was always going to happen no matter what. But hey, maybe the characters don't know that. I am willing to offer that olive branch since we're dealing with something as complex as time travel, so the characters may not have a full understanding of the mechanics at play. And if the ability to change the past is something the characters believe to be possible, then that's all that's relevant to any potential criticism of their decisions. Hence why, even though I'm pretty sure this universe is operating under the rules of being a time loop, I still criticize the villain's time travel plan, because if he believes he can change history, then he should also realize he's risking the destruction of the space-time continuum, or he should realize his plan isn't going to change jack shit, and it's only fair to judge their actions based on the knowledge they have available to them. But here's the thing, if they genuinely believe they have the ability to change the past, then this whole scene just got significantly worse for so many reasons. Because earlier in the movie, Helena and Indy had an entire conversation on what they'd do if they had the ability to go back in time. And Indy said he'd want to go back to stop Mutt from enlisting in the war so he wouldn't die and his marriage with Marion wouldn't be destroyed. And now that he actually has the dial, now that he has the chance he always wanted to go back in time and save his son, he just abandons the idea entirely and just wants to be left alone in the past. Fuck off. Who are you? Actually, who are you? Who is this bitter old ghoul parading around with a fedora as if he's the same intelligent, adventurous, and compassionate Indiana Jones we fell in love with from the original trilogy?
But what if this is the only time fissure and it's not possible to go back to when Mutt was alive?
You don't know that. I don't know that. And the characters certainly don't know that. Indy would surely at least want to verify whether such a thing was even possible when it comes to his son's life, as opposed to outright ruling it out as a possibility.
But Indy was shot and he's bleeding to death. How can he possibly go back in time in that condition?
I don't know, man. It sure seems like he's able to survive a whole lot of shit, even when being shot in the chest. Also, one scene later, he's revealed to have been healed back to normal, so how about you go home, get patched up, and then go back in time to try to save Mutt when you're better?
But have you considered that if he changes the past, he might erase the future? Didn't you just criticize the villain for doing that exact thing?
Yes, of course I know that. But I believe wholeheartedly that a father's first instinct, that Indy's first instinct, would be to do whatever is within their power to save their child, even if they don't fully take everything into consideration. That they would give up the world to protect the people they love most. That Indy's immediate desire would be to try to use this dial to save Mutt's life, and perhaps he knows deep down that such a thing might not be possible or might lead to massively negative implications for all of space-time, but that the emotional desire to get his family back together is taking precedence in this moment. And that's a conversation they could have had. God, that could have been interesting. That Indy spoke from a place of emotion, wanting to use the dial to restore his family, but Helena has to be the voice of reason explaining the logical problems that might come about as a result of changing history, and they could ponder whether it's even worth taking that risk. One life versus the life of the universe. But they don't. They don't ever even discuss this as a possibility. It's like he's entirely forgotten about his son. Literally, what was the point of the conversation on the boat if that was never gonna pay off in any way in this scene? To be blunt, Indiana Jones has been completely character assassinated. He wouldn't do this. He just wouldn't. He would not elect to stay behind and become a part of a time period he wants to exist in just because he's dying. Within his understanding of time travel, that being that it is possible to change the past, he is willing to risk altering the course of history forever purely for his own selfish desires. Not to save Mutt's life. No. That thought apparently never even crossed his mind. But to abandon the present and become a part of ancient history? Oh, he's just chomping at the bit to seize that moment. A character who has nothing but the utmost respect for history, and whose adventures were always rooted not in the money or fame he gained, but from unearthing relics of the past and ensuring they were safely secured at Brody's museum where they could be preserved and used to educate kids about the past. That character wants to risk altering the course of history forever. Do you see the joy in this man's face when he finds these things and is assured the museum will get to keep them when he's done?
They want you to go for it.
Oh, Marcus!
They want you to get a hold of the Ark before the Nazis do.
Museum? Museum gets the Ark when we're finished.
Oh, yes.
Oh.
That thing represents everything we got into archaeology for in the first place.
Do you see how disgruntled and legitimately frustrated he gets when he is unable to obtain these objects for preservation?
I had it, Marcus. I had it in my hand.
How he feels so upset at his failure to retrieve something so important that he scrambles to try to make it up to him?
I can get it. I got it all figured out. There's only one place you can sell it, Marrakesh. I got these pieces. They're good pieces, Marcus.
How he views the situation of the Ark being shipped away to a warehouse in Area 51 instead of at Brody's museum as he was promised as being totally unacceptable in his own words?
Well, the money's fine. The situation is totally unacceptable.
Well, Jen.
Bureaucratic
What'd they say?
They don't know what they've got there.
Or Coronado's cross in The Last Crusade both as a kid and as an adult?
Belongs to Coronado.
Coronado's dead, and so are all of his grandchildren.
This should be in a museum.
That belongs in a museum!
He isn't risking his life to retrieve these things to add to his own personal collection so he can ogle them all day long. He's doing it so they can be brought to the museum because he believes in preservation of such hugely significant historical artifacts, so people young and old can come and learn something about it. I do not believe for even a second that Indy would totally abandon all that respect in favor of selfishly wanting to stay behind in this time period. Look, I'm not saying he wouldn't want to stay in this time period. I think if you are passionate about history and archaeology, you've probably always fantasized to at least some degree about becoming a part of the history you've dedicated your life to studying. But there is a gargantuan difference between wanting to do something and actually seriously deciding to do that thing. In the other movies, Indy always came to the conclusion that no matter how strong his love or passion for the artifacts he sought after was, he always walked away from them. He always left them behind because there were more important things in life than that. If he just stood on the beach looking longingly at the battle, admiring that he got to witness a major historical event right before his eyes, maybe even saying something that demonstrates he wishes he could stick around longer, but ultimately still understands he has to return, that'd be one thing. But he doesn't do that. Helena is basically on her hands and knees, begging Indy to come home with her, and he just adamantly stands his ground about how much he wants to stay behind and tells her to go home. Helena says, "You'll change the course of history," and he's just like, "Is that such a bad thing?" Motherfucker, you're all about history, you dilapidated coffee table! Let me die in the past because the future sucks, donkey cock. My god. And no, I do not care that he doesn't ultimately commit to the choice to stay behind, because the fact that he ever seriously considered doing so is bad enough by itself. Especially because it's not like he has some sudden change of heart like Woody at the start of Toy Story 4. The only reason he returns to the 60s is because Helena knocks him unconscious. And that is the other major part of why this pisses me off so much. Indy is robbed of his final choice. He has no character arc. He never comes to the realization that for as many complications limitations and struggles as his life currently has in the present, he still has value to offer the world and his life is still worth living. He never actually gets to choose anything for himself because of her little stunt, and then in the very next scene, everyone acts as if nothing happened and everything's totally fine. It might actually be the single most jarring cut I've ever seen in a film. How did they even get back to the present? There's a 0% chance she dragged him onto the plane and they took off in time when seconds ago they were saying that the portal would close any second now, and there's even less of a chance that they managed to fly somewhere safe to land and then drive to a hospital before he bled out. And how can you possibly sit there with a straight face blabbering on about how much the world needs Indiana Jones when you've spent the entire movie making fun of him and showing him as being incompetent while Helena does everything else? Like, what the fuck is happening right now? And people are loving this film! Its Rotten Tomatoes score has skyrocketed, it has an overall positive IMDb score, and all I've seen on Twitter when I haven't exceeded my fucking rate limit is people singing its praises, talking about how it's a perfect finale for Indiana Jones, and it's such a rip-roaring fun time that's a love letter to the franchise. I feel like I'm going insane! Is this another Toy Story 4 situation? Am I the only person on the planet who was pissed off beyond belief by this travesty? And we're still not done yet! Because then we have the ending of this film, which is another thing that I've seen people unanimously say they loved. They say, okay, sure, the movie itself is pretty shit, but at least the opening was great and the final few minutes were great. No! Stop it! What are you talking about? This ending is still just as crap as the rest of it. I mean, I know exactly why people like this ending, and it's because they bring Marion back for the final few minutes in an MCU-style introduction and basically mirror this scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark word for word.
Well, goddammit, Indy, where doesn't it hurt?
Here.
Only instead of Indy doing it, Marion does it, and then the two of them kiss, implying that they're gonna get back together after all. And they think they're very clever for calling back to this and giving them their happily ever after, but they're not. It's fan service shoved in at the absolute last second to distract you from all the dumbassery you were just forced to witness. And the only reason why this is supposed to have any level of emotional resonance is because of a decision made by the writers of this movie to rip the two of them apart. But do you want to know what the worst part of it was? My audience clapped for this. No, seriously. They euphorically clapped and cheered at seeing these two get back together. And I was just sitting there confused out of my mind. Like, what? What is happening? I felt like I was losing my damn mind. Did all of you collectively forget the beginning of this movie? They were happy at the end of Crystal Skull. Indy and Marion had their happily ever after. They got married. That was it. It was done. It was over. Dial of Destiny was the movie that decided to rip the two of them apart from each other and then expect us to clap when they get them back together in the end. Like, no, movie! You don't get to shove me out in the middle of the highway facing down oncoming traffic, and then pull me to safety a few minutes later and expect me to respect you for saving my life. Like, no! You're the only reason I was out in the middle of oncoming traffic in the first place, you shitheads! And they treat this as if everything's just back to normal, but it's not. Marion just shows up and they almost immediately kiss, and apparently they all just totally gloss over the issues in their marriage that led them to getting a divorce in the first place. The film treats it like Helena bringing Marion back into Indy's life just immediately solves all his problems, but it doesn't. These two were getting divorced for a reason. Their son dying drove them apart. Helena had absolutely no right forcing Marion back into his life with no understanding of the situation and without his knowledge. Of course, it all works out and it's a happily ever after, but it shouldn't be. It makes no sense for this to play out the way that it does. But we don't care about Mutt. He sucked, remember? So it's fine that he died off screen. All that matters is he and Marion can finally get back together. No! I don't fucking care if you hated Mutt or not. I hated Mutt, alright? That still doesn't give you permission to pretend like he never existed. We should not be celebrating him being erased from the story. He is the very reason these two were splitting apart in the first place. And absolutely nothing changed throughout this movie. Their relationship wasn't explored at all, but magically they want you to think it's all perfectly fixed up now. And for the final kick to the balls, Marion's like, I heard you're back, Indy. Which... ugh. A, what do you mean? Helena literally just had to stop Indy from throwing himself away. She's like the Woody to his fork face, but somehow that means he's back? B, what an insane indictment on Marion's character. The idea that she'd only want to come back to be a part of Indy's life if he's completely well put together with no mental baggage or depression or anything that would necessitate any kind of care on her part, and she only wants to be here if he's already back to normal? Fuck you. You've made me hate erased Marion as a character from that one line alone. Even Crystal Skull didn't manage to do that. This ending is absolutely horrific. And do you guys remember at the beginning of the film when Indy was framed for murder? Because the script certainly doesn't. What the fuck happened to that plot line? Well, the answer is that it just disappeared and they're hoping you forgot about it because they did a member berry for Raiders of the Lost Ark. And this is yet another problem that carried over from Crystal Skull, where the film opens with Indy getting into a spat with government officials about a major cover-up operation where he faces scrutiny for aiding and abetting the Russian break into the warehouse, resulting in him being fired from the university after the FBI raid his office, only for literally none of that to ever be addressed again at any point throughout the next hour and a half of the adventure. Then we arrive back at the college after the fucking flying saucer leaves, and suddenly we see Indy's been reinstated as the associate dean. It's the exact same thing. How did you do this again? Almost beat for beat. Who wrote this? This ending is in no way connected to the events of the movie. It feels so blatantly cobbled together, like minutes before they were ready to shoot, just to shove as much fan service in there as they possibly could. I wonder why that might be the case. And that's the movie. Helena and the kid leave the apartment, presumably to go on another adventure Lucasfilm wants to make, because I guess they expected people to love her character and want to see more of her, and then they iris out on Indy's hat, hanging on a hook before he grabs it, and we cut to credits. I thought for sure going into this that there was no way it could be worse than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I rewatched that movie the day before I saw Dial of Destiny and was blown away by how bad it was. I hadn't seen it in like 10 years and there's so many things about it, big and small, beyond the obvious stuff like the fridge nuking, jungle swinging, and interdimensional beings, that make it horrible to watch. And yet they managed to subvert my expectations in more ways than one by creating one of the most wretched pieces of filth I've ever had the displeasure of watching, which I guess to some people means it's automatically a masterpiece, but I am not one of those people. Yeah, I certainly didn't expect Indiana Jones to be completely character assassinated and portrayed as a grumpy old man who needs to be airlifted out of every single scene he's in by the characters around him. I didn't expect him to be banging on his neighbor's doors with a baseball bat demanding they turn down the music, and I absolutely didn't expect him to be a bitter prick the whole movie. It's like he's on life support for the entire runtime. Like they literally had to drag him out of bed, rolling onto set every damn day, and then jolt him awake with defibrillators. Are you aware that you can tell stories about older characters that aren't just about how shit everything is, and how much the world has moved on, and how much they want to die? You know that there are ways in which you can take a widely revered hero and bring him down to rock bottom without compromising his character values, right? You'd think that if they wanted to strip away everything Indiana Jones had at the end of Crystal Skull, then they'd at least build him back up by the end, right? But no, up until the final minutes, he just wants to die, and then he randomly gets back together with Marion for literally no reason, and all the other things that made his life miserable in the beginning are totally overlooked. Hey, have you guys heard of this other elderly character? Maybe not, he's pretty obscure. His name is Henry Jones Sr., and he wasn't dejected, he wasn't boring, he wasn't aggressively pessimistic about everyone and everything. He was a vibrant and energetic character, just as passionate about archaeology as his son, feeling just as ebullient at the prospect of tracking down the Grail as he was when he was younger. But not only is Indy a completely unlikable fuckwit in this movie, he's utterly worthless to the story. Throughout the entire climax, he's just sat in the back of a plane while the Nazis end up getting themselves in a plane crash. And by the way, you can say the same thing about Raiders of the Lost Ark, that Indy's just tied up during the finale and doesn't play a part in the demise of Belloc. And it's really the only part of the movie I don't particularly like for that very reason. The whole thing feels very anticlimactic. But the rest of Raiders is entirely driven by the actions of Indy. His adventures on the quest for the Ark, the decisions he makes, the puzzles he solves, none of this happens without Indiana Jones. Whereas in this film, it's so clear that despite being the titular character, Indiana Jones was not a priority for the writers. It's like they were annoyed that they just had to include him because it was, you know, an Indiana Jones movie, so they just dragged him from scene to scene as a means to prop up the hero they actually want you to care about and made Indy himself as unlikable as possible. Look, I know Harrison Ford is much older than he was for the original movies, and as such the character has aged with him, but being more physically fragile doesn't excuse your personality devolving into a worse version of Oscar the Grouch. And it also begs the question of why you even bothered making another Indiana Jones movie if it wasn't even going to be about him, and he couldn't physically do the things he used to be able to. I was stunned by how completely incoherent the story is across every single scene, but the blatant disrespect this film seems to have for Indy is by far my biggest problem with it, and the thing that makes me despise it and everything it stands for. The only other rationalization I can think of for why they've done all this is the idea that Indiana Jones was too perfect of a character, too much of a Gary Stu. We needed to make him more interesting. No, shut up. He wasn't Professor Layton or someone like that. He was vulnerable. He wasn't a man of action who never did anything wrong. The opening of Raiders of the Lost Ark has him brush with death several times, barely escaping by the skin of his teeth, and then shows him pathetically running away from the Jovitos, being mortally terrified of snakes, and the entirety of The Last Crusade is spent taking a deep dive into his family life, what makes him tick, and where and why he draws value from the profession of archaeology. He wasn't a paragon of humanity who needed depth and flaws. He already had both of those things. You just made him into a miserable, suicidal old man who's painful to watch on screen. I originally wanted to make a joke about this film's name being hilariously similar to Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Dual Destinies, them both being the 5th entry in their respective franchises, but I don't want a game as good as that to be associated with this pile of unmitigated dog shit. I never thought I'd say this, but perhaps we treated Crystal Skull too harshly. And I'm not saying that as some sort of Halo cycle thing where I try to pretend like the last entry wasn't actually that bad after the new entry comes out. No, I rewatched it the day before I saw Dial of Destiny. It's still shit, but it's not absolutely worthless in every respect. There are a couple of cool lines. There's like one whole good action scene, and for as annoying as some of the ways in which Indy is portrayed in that movie are, none of it even comes close to the levels of disrespect that Dial of Destiny has for him. And it actually gave Indy a happy ending that Dial of Destiny subsequently ripped away from him. Even though it tried to reverse it with Marion, they still killed off Mutt for literally no reason other than, I presume, to beat down Indiana Jones as much as they possibly could. I have no other explanation for it, and I will gladly take the fridge nuking, monkey swinging, and interdimensional beings any day of the week over the crap this film had in store for me. I am so sorry, Crystal Skull. I am truly, deeply sorry for ever thinking you were as bad as things could possibly get. And I swear to God, I better not see a single one of you saying that I just went in looking to hate it, or that I just hate it because it's a new modern movie. Missing came out this year, and it's one of my all-time favorite films. Elemental just came out in June, and I also really liked that, despite both of them being modern, recent releases. Ask anybody on my Discord server. I was hyped out of my mind to see Dial of Destiny. I was so unbelievably excited that I even went to the theater fully suited out in an Indiana Jones cosplay because of how much I've loved this character and these films throughout my life. This movie had the exact same effect on me as Toy Story 4 did, and that previously, I always liked the Indiana Jones movies, and I've always said that Last Crusade is among my all-time favorites, but I didn't realize just how much I had fallen in love with this character and all his adventures until I watched him get torn to shreds in Dial of Destiny. I never realized just how important that trilogy was to me and how much I absolutely adored watching them again and again. You want to know why I've been showing gameplay of Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings in the background of this video? It's not just because this film's still in theaters and I don't have access to it to show footage scene by scene. It's not just because it's a great game that you should play unless you don't like motion controls, in which case, maybe don't. It's because this was the very first piece of media I ever covered on the channel. My channel started almost 10 years ago with a walkthrough of Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings. You shouldn't watch it because I was 11 years old and cringe, but it exists, and it was the very first thing I ever did on this platform. The first thing I ever felt passionate enough about to put on YouTube. And before my Toy Story 4 series took off out of nowhere last year, my most popular videos were my walkthroughs for the LEGO games, specifically LEGO Indiana Jones, because I knew those games like the back of my hand from how much I've loved this series. I have been a massive Indiana Jones fan for as long as I can remember. Toy Story may have meant far more to me from a far younger age, but the Indiana Jones movies were the earliest ones that got me truly passionate about the art of filmmaking. They inspired me to look extensively into as much behind-the-scenes content as I could find, because I wanted to know how they pulled off all these incredible feats. And look, I know the original 3 movies are not flawless, and I've never claimed otherwise. How the hell does Indy not drown or freeze to death clinging to the side of the submarine? Why make the best action scene I've ever seen in a movie, only for it to not be the climax and then have the ending brought about by events the main characters have no involvement with. How can you possibly expect me to believe Indy survived this shit? Willie sucks, and so does this whole back and forth scene and the immense contrivance that leads them to the Temple of Doom, as well as this entire death trap scene that is initiated twice because of stupid decision making and astronomical inconvenience. They rubberband Indy away from this crusher when his head is centimeters away from it like 5 times. How in the world could this paper have survived their underwater swim without sustaining even the slightest bit of water damage? Only the penitent man shall pass doesn't work as a riddle, because if you only kneel before God, as it implies, you're gonna get chopped up by the second blade right here. I do not want to pretend like any of these movies are flawless, as I don't believe any film to be truly without flaw, not even my all-time favorites, but the minimal amount of issues you can find are absolutely dwarfed by the amount of things that the original trilogy does right, and that's what made me fall in love with them all those years ago. What's kept me coming back time and time again. Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, and The Last Crusade are all very different stories, structurally, thematically, and tonally, but they're also unified by a singular creative vision with consistent ideas and messages that all pay off with the sensational climax of The Last Crusade. Everything about those 3 films was exhilarating to my little mind and has only gone on to impress me more and more as I've continued to revisit them as an adult. As a kid, I loved the escapist fantasy they provided, and as an adult, I've revisited them to draw out incredibly valuable messages that transcend time. The masterful direction and cinematography, the lightning-fast pace that never gives you the chance to look away from the screen, yet also never moves too quickly for your own good, the charming chemistry between the characters, the nail-biting and expertly shot and choreographed action sequences, and the heart, the emotional core of the stories, and the thematic relevance most of the artifacts they sought after carried beyond simply being some magical object. Almost every single aspect of those movies was spectacularly crafted, and because of that, I wanted Indiana Jones to go out on a much higher note than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. This character deserved a far better swan song than that. Call it blind faith or naivety if you'd like, but I wanted more than anything else for this movie to end up being good. I streamed a playthrough of the original LEGO game on my second channel and rewatched the entire series in the week leading up to Dial of Destiny's release, and went into the theater hoping that, even if we didn't get a masterpiece on par with Raiders of the Lost Ark or The Last Crusade, at least we wouldn't get something as bad as Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and if nothing else, I'd get a satisfying conclusion for one of the most iconic adventuring heroes in cinematic history. But they could not have missed the mark more significantly. Dial of Destiny doesn't seem to have any respect for this series, and I am legitimately baffled by people who say this was a love letter to Indiana Jones. Every single thing I just mentioned that made the original trilogy so spectacular was all systematically ripped out, and Indy's character was tossed to the curb for no reason other than setting up a new hero to carry the franchise forward into the future. Even Crystal Skull was self-aware enough not to do that. I've been alluding to it for a while now, but I'll be direct this time. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny left me with the exact same gut-wrenching, heart-sinking pit in my stomach that I felt when I saw Toy Story 4 for the first time. A feeling impossible to forget. I've seen some pretty awful movies and shows in between now and then, but at no point throughout any of those pieces of media had I felt this emotionally and mentally broken, and I saw the Manifest finale last month. If you asked me whether I'd rather watch Toy Story 4 again or Dial of Destiny again, I honestly don't know which one I'd choose, but at the moment, I'm kinda leaning toward the former. This is by far the worst film I have seen this year, and no, I haven't seen The Flash because fuck everything about that movie, but of what I have seen, this is the absolute worst, and missing is still the best. If my review of this film made you want to see it more out of morbid curiosity, don't. Suppress those feelings. They trounced on the legacy of Indiana Jones, and this is not at all the swan song the character needed, nor is it what he deserved. They gloriously gloriously failed to listen to their own advice that this belongs in a museum. A line purposefully crafted that it's okay to let certain things stay in the past, to preserve them as a relic of history for younger generations to revisit and admire and learn from, not to drag corpses out of the past and puppet them around for your own selfish desires, because nothing good ever comes of doing that. I hope that fortune and glory was worth it, Lucasfilm, because you just drained Indiana Jones of any bit of either of those things he ever had. What a fucking finale to a franchise. Well, that took a lot longer to make than I wanted. This would ordinarily be the part where I tell you to watch my other stuff, but honestly, I have no energy left at this point. Links will be in the description if you want to check out my other analysis videos. If you love this movie, that's cool. I'm glad you managed to find some enjoyment out of it, but I didn't at all. Watching Dial of Destiny and making this video was quite miserable because of how much it pains me to think about this film. Also, I only watched it once in theaters, so I might have gotten a couple things wrong, and I know for a fact there's a lot of issues that I missed. Even just throughout the course of editing this video, I have thought of even more things that piss me off about this film that I just did not have the time or energy to include. If you're curious as to whether or not I'm going to do an extensive scene-by-scene breakdown when this hits Disney+, the answer is I genuinely don't know. I could do it, because there are seriously hours worth of more issues to go over that I couldn't cover in this video, but it's a question of whether I want to subject myself to watching this dog shit again, and if there's even enough interest to justify me doing that. So if you want to see me shred every frame of this film apart once it comes out digitally, please let me know in the comments, and I'll consider taking a crack at it. But for now, I'm gonna jump right back into editing the 3 massive projects I talked about in my Elemental video last month, because I'm hoping to get at least one of them out before the end of July. That is not a promise or a deadline, that's just a hope that I may or may not be able to reach, we'll see. If not, the next thing you'll see from me is an audio commentary premiering later this week. And that's all for now, so thanks for watching, thanks for supporting the channel, I hope you enjoyed this review. If you've seen Dial of Destiny, let me know what you think of it in the comments below, and I'll see you all at some point in the future for whatever it is you decide to watch next. Goodbye.